Hello, 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 everyone. It's your girl, Gabrielle. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. If you are new to the show, let me tell you what the show is all about. So, this is the show where we like to have real talk about real things. We like to talk about things in education, physical health, mental health, employment. We like to talk about learning disabilities, homeschooling, robots taking our jobs. So we like to cover a lot of different ground here on Hot Topics as we are a part of my tutoring company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So, of course, this show, you could think of it as an educational program, right? You don't see a lot of educational shows anymore. Well, I'm bringing it back. So consider this an educational type program. So today I am, looking forward to this discussion. It's something that I've wanted to talk about for a while, and today I get to have that conversation. So today we are going to talk about dyslexia, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So, the topic of the show is what is this? What is dyslexia? What is it? We are going to get into the nitty gritty of it and we're going to explore this disorder. So, what is dyslexia? And excuse me. My guest today, who's going to help me out, her name is Lisa Parnello, and let me tell you about her. So, Lisa Parnello is a dyslexia therapist and dyslexia devoted podcast host, helping both children and parents on their dyslexia journey. There you go. All right, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring her to the stage. Hi, Lisa, how you doing?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you for having me today.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so today we are going to talk about dyslexia, right? So I'm sure a lot of parents listening right now, watching and listening, they may have questions about what it is, what does it look like, how to identify it, all that good stuff. Um, so I'm going to pass the baton, as I like to say. So I'm going to start with a simple question. What is this dyslexia? What is it?
Dyslexia is a neurological difference, meaning it's the way their brain works differently, and it's how the brain processes language. And so oftentimes people think it's about seeing B's and D's backward, and that's really not it at all. It's really about how the brain maps those letters and how they are able to process what those letters mean and represent. Their brain doesn't have a strong connection between the sounds that we say and we speak and we read and the letters that are put on the page. And so we want to make sure that parents and families understand it's not that they're seeing anything any different than anyone else. It's not a vision problem at all. It's all about how the brain processes language. And students with dyslexia need really explicit instruction as to how do the sounds and letters in our world work? How do they read? Like, as we go out into the universe, it's really natural to learn how to talk, but it's not natural to learn how to read. Humans made up reading because they wanted a way of record keeping and sharing information and sharing stories. And language developed naturally. And so, not everyone's brain is wired to learn how to read. So, people with dyslexia need really explicit instruction as to how reading works. Because when we look at a tree outside, it still looks like a tree. Whether I'm looking at it from up high in an airplane or I'm laying underneath it or if I'm walking past one, it's still a tree. But if you look at a letter B versus a letter D versus a letter P, the same general shape, when you look at it in different directions, means something entirely different. So that doesn't really process the same in our brains. So kids with dyslexia and adults with dyslexia, because it's not something that goes away, just need to be taught in a very different way, but they can be extremely successful.
Wonderful. So let's dive into that. Just my camera. Okay. So let's dive into that. So when you say they need to be taught in a special way, what does that mean? Tell us more about that.
They need really explicit instruction as to how the letters work within our language. And a lot of programs teach kids to look at the pictures. Okay, well, what do you see in the picture if you can't figure out that word? Or just look at the first letter. And that doesn't really help a kid with dyslexia because not all the words are in the picture. And kids with dyslexia need to know, how do the letters match the sounds that we say? They see a group of letters and they just see a group of letters. It doesn't necessarily have meaning to them. So they need to know really explicitly, what do those letter patterns mean? Why is it that an S makes one sound, but an S and an H together make a different sound? And we have 44 sounds in our language, but only 26 letters. And so they need to be explicitly shown how those letters work together in order to form those sounds, in order to be able to read and break down the larger words without suddenly seeing them and being very intimidated by them and getting nervous when they look at the letters and go, oh no, I can't read that, it's too big. And because they often will memorize what the outline or the shape of the word looks like. And that doesn't really help you when it comes to reading. You need to know the pattern of how do the letters work together.
So you're saying it's not just flipping letters backwards or, flipping words backwards, right? It's identifying sounds as
Hmm.
well.
And it's how they process what they see. So the reason people think saw and was is the same is because it's all the same letters. And so if they don't understand that the letter and the order of the letters has meaning to them, then they don't understand how to process what those words mean quickly. So people who don't have dyslexia can often quickly look at a word and recognize it without actually sounding out every letter. But kids with dyslexia need somebody to show them how to sound out every letter until they get good enough at it that eventually it can get built into their brain, into their memory, that they can recognize it quickly. And that takes time and work to get that far, but they can do it. They just need someone to show them the way.
So like what's a strategy that a specialist might use or a teacher might use?
So, one example might be to tap out the sounds in a word. And so, a lot of Orton Gilling based programs, that's the main research behind the strategies that work for kids with dyslexia that we've shown for years really helps kids, and is the process of structured literacy, which is to tap out the individual sounds within the word. So, I will usually use my actual fingers to tap out the sound. So, for example, the word chat, because you and I are having a chat today. Let's do that word. So we have 4 letters, but we don't really have 4 sounds. We have 3 sounds. We have ch, ah, t. So we would teach the child how to break up those individual letters and how to associate them with the sounds.
Oh, so you break it down by not syllables, but
But
phonics.
phonemes,
Right.
phonemes, yeah. So yes, it's basically very strict phonics, and break it down to the phonemes, which are the smallest units of sound in our language.
Oh, okay. So now what about the common, I guess, symptom about flipping the letters backwards or the words backwards? What do you do? What strategies do you use
Um,
for those?
A lot of that is really just repetition and practice and being able to go both forward and backward with sound. So one of the ways I was describing is would be for decoding. So being able to look at letters and read them. But then we also teach it in reverse, which is if I say b, what would that look like on paper, and showing them how to write that sound. So if I say b, they would say b, b, and then they write it. And so that they can start mapping it stronger in their memory of what does the sound of b look like on paper. And so that we're building up that orthographic memory. That's the fancy term for the memory of what it looks like when it hits the page.
Oh, okay. Okay. So there's a lot of stress on phonics, it sounds like.
Yes. They need very explicit phonics is what works really well for kids with dyslexia.
Interesting, interesting. So how do you identify dyslexia?
There's no one assessment that identifies dyslexia because it's actually a mixture of a lot of different things all that come together to show that someone has dyslexia. So, dyslexia is actually completely separate from just reading. You can actually identify kids who are at risk of dyslexia before they ever try to read a book. So, for example, for younger students, they might say paschetti instead of spaghetti because their brain is not processing the language and hearing the sounds in the right order. A lot of times, kids with dyslexia are really struggling on that sound order of what they hear and being able to repeat it. So instead of Netflix, they might say Nextflix. Or instead of being able to rhyme, rhyming might be really hard for them. They might have a really hard time with rhyming because they don't hear the difference in the sounds. They need to be shown, like, what is the pattern of this? Oh, they all end with am. Okay. And so someone needs to show them more explicitly how to do simple things like rhyming as well. And so it's being able to process that phonemic awareness, so being able to hear sounds. And then they often have trouble with the rhyming. They often have trouble with the sequence. So if they tell a story, they might tell it in circles. It may not necessarily go in a chronological order. Often people with dyslexia understand the big picture, but then they miss the little details. So it's kind of like the opposite of autism in some ways, of where they will see all the tiny little details but miss the big idea. Dyslexia is the opposite. A lot of times they really understand the big idea. They get the main point. So like if they're misreading a sentence, they might say in the home instead of in the house because they really understand the main idea. They get what it's talking about. So they're going for meaning, not necessarily the nitty-gritty details. And so it'll often come out with reading that isn't very fluent, really bad spelling. Sometimes their handwriting is terrible because they don't have that strong relationship between what the letters look like and what they sound like. And so there's a few different things that all come together. But overall, it's just a different way of thinking and processing language.
Interesting, interesting. So now, so we talked about the strategies, right? What about medical treatment? Is there a cure? Is there a pill? Is there a
No,
shot? Like what is there any kind of
it is
medical
all
treatment?
about educational therapy. So, my title is a dyslexia therapist because I help the kids with learning how to read, but I also help them understand their learning difference and understand how to use assistive technology and things like that because dyslexia never goes away. So, someone with dyslexia will always have it, but they might become a stronger reader. So, just because you have dyslexia doesn't mean you can't become a good reader. I've got a few kids who've actually been diagnosed as dyslexia by history, as in they don't test as if they have dyslexia anymore because they've gotten so much remediation. They're doing so much better that they're actually really great readers now. But there are certain things that are always going to be challenging for them, such as spelling. Spelling is often what comes after learning to read. So a lot of times you can become a better reader, but then it still comes out in the spelling a lot more often. And so it's something that always exists, and it's not necessarily a bad thing because we have a lot of amazing, fantastic people who are dyslexic. So people like Richard Branson and Whoopi Goldberg and all sorts of amazing, fantastic people who created amazing, successful careers because their brain works differently. So we just have to remember it's not always about getting rid of something. It's more about how do we learn some accommodations to make life a little easier.
Right, and I know I think this dyslexia is pretty common, I think, in the celebrity world,
Yeah,
right?
it's
So
one in five even in the regular world, and it just happens on a continuum, so we just don't realize it a lot of times. Some people, it's
mm,
just, oh, I'm just a bad speller, and then that's just how they go about life. We've got spell check these days. We have the amazing wonders of autocorrect and all these other strategies that make life so much easier that people are like, yeah, I'm just terrible at spelling. It's fine, or oh, I just read a little slower.
so just to be clear, so just because you are bad at spelling doesn't necessarily mean you have dyslexia.
Not necessarily. Sometimes we jokingly call it dyslexia, as in no one taught you how letters and spelling works. Because sometimes people are taught spelling with like, here's your spelling list, memorize it, write it 5 times. All right, now you should spell it. When that doesn't actually teach you how to spell a word. Copying a word 5 times teaches you no logic as to why those letters are spelled the way they are. And so sometimes it's really just poor teaching sometimes. And it's not the teachers mean bad. I've been a teacher for a very long time. And a lot of us were never taught about dyslexia. A lot of us were never taught why people need explicit instruction in phonics. A lot of times we taught in schools that actually don't want you to teach much phonics. And so it just kind of depends on the situation you were put in as an educator of what you were taught. I got 2 different credentials before I ever learned how to teach a kid with dyslexia, and neither one of those credentials taught me how to teach kids with dyslexia. I got extra training after my 2 credentials just to help kids with dyslexia because it's not widely taught in our teacher programs and it's not widely taught in our schools. And so we have to make sure that we keep spreading the word. So thank you for letting me spread my word on this little show here because more people need to understand. It's teachers are really trying their absolute best. They're not trying to hurt kids by teaching them a different way. They just weren't shown a better way to do it.
So now, for parents, right? Because it's you're trying to reach out to parents. Let's say they have a suspicion, right? that their child has dyslexia, what are the next steps for them? What should they do?
You can have a couple different pathways. One is that you can formally request an evaluation through the school. Usually it has to be done in writing, saying that, I think my child has a learning disability and I need to have them evaluated. And then that's one way. And then the school pays for the testing. Another way is to go through a school psychologist or educational psychologist or a neuropsychologist and get outside testing done to get them evaluated outside of schools. And because some school systems are very good about flagging kids who have learning differences for reading, and other ones are not so much. They have to be years and years behind grade level before they will get different support at school. And so some parents have found success going through their district, and other parents have only found success if they've gone out on their own to get their own private evaluations. And so the one thing is the evaluations are quite expensive. So usually it's best to try to go through the school first and see if you can get the testing done through the school system, because it literally costs thousands of dollars to get some of the assessments done. And then sometimes you can go through really great programs that will have like sliding scales to help pay for some of the testing too. So that is another option that you can always look at for what's available in your area.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so I wanted to throw some symptoms at you from this about dyslexia. I'm looking at it online through mayoclinic.org, so I wanted to see what your thoughts are, the accuracy. All right, so before school, according to Mayo Clinic, signs that a young child may be risk of dys- dyslexia include late talking and learning new words slowly. What are your thoughts on those?
Absolutely. Because, like I said, it's a language based learning difference. So it's about how the brain processes language. And so I actually just did a podcast episode called Thinking in Pictures. And it was actually inspired by my students. So I work with kids who are kindergarten through about 10th grade ish. I say ish because there's some of my kids never leave me. We just keep changing the goal line as to what we're working on. And several of them will tell me they actually think in pictures, they don't actually think in words. And so, for example, we were reading a story and we use special readers that don't say all the words because we only use ones that have the patterns I've specifically taught them. So, for example, we're reading about a bat and a ball, but it never says the word baseball. So I asked the students, so what game are they playing in the story? And then she went and she pantomimed what it was like to hit a baseball. And she was actually able to think of a pantomime faster than the word baseball, because her brain thinks about language in a very different way. She thinks about what it looks like. What does she imagine in the scene? She doesn't think about the words to describe it. And so a lot of times our kids with dyslexia don't always describe things. They might say the whatchamacallit, the thing. And they know what they mean, but they have a trouble with that expressive language of really getting it out so that you understand what they mean. So sometimes people think kids with dyslexia don't understand what they're reading, when really they just don't understand how to put it into words and explain it to somebody else. Because, like, I know what certain words mean, but if you ask me, well, what does that word mean? I have a hard time articulating it without just using the word in a sentence sometimes, but I know what it means. And it's the same idea for a kiddo. They understand a thought or a concept, but they don't know how to quite put it into words in a way that you will understand it as well.
Uh, and that's an excellent point. I mean, before I continue, there's a thought that came to me. So, there's a lot of assisting technologies out there for people
Yes.
with dyslexia. Um, I think there's one that will, I guess, pronounce the words for you.
Hmm.
So what are your thoughts on? I'm thinking more for adults, but what are your thoughts on the technology that is out there for for people with dyslexia?
It has come a long way. There are so many different options, and I have some of my students that like live and breathe by their assistive technology. It's the only way they make it through school, because even once they learn how to read, it does take them longer. And so you don't always have time. Like if you think about a high school kid who has 2 hours of homework, you're a high school kid with dyslexia, you now have 4 hours of homework because everything takes you twice as long as everybody else. And if you can use assistive technology to listen to books, to listen to the websites, it makes life so much easier. And they have all sorts of different ones. So there's like Google Read and Write is a Chrome extension you can add on to a Chromebook or a regular laptop with a Chrome web browser. There's a new one called Speechify that was actually developed by somebody with dyslexia, and it will take a picture and it'll read to you something that was a physical book in front of you, and it'll read it to you. It's a subscription thing, so it's like a really robotic voice for the free version, but is an extremely natural voice. I think they even have Snoop Dogg as one of the narrators that you can choose. And so it's one of those ones where if you have the paid one, that it's very realistic sounding. It doesn't sound like a robot. One of the ones that's free for people with dyslexia that you can usually get through your school is Learning Ally. And that one's a really great one where it'll highlight the words as it reads to them. So then students can learn to follow along with their eyes. And then they can start to recognize what words look like after they've heard them a few times. And then there's another one called Bookshare is another option. And so there's just all sorts of different ways. And even just the built-in things on, iPhones and, computers these days, they have all sorts of built-in speech to text technology already in our main devices. And for kids, it's actually really hard because everyone lives on their phones. They text and they do their TikToks and whatever's. And so if a kid can't text, that actually really hurts them socially, because if all their friends are texting and they can hardly read, that actually makes it really hard for them. So modern technology is pretty fantastic because they can just talk into their phone and then they can text with their friends just like everybody else.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now, how important is it for a student to pronounce a word? Because I know we talked about phonics, but if you have all this technology that will pronounce the word for you, um, how important is it? Is it really that important to teach phonics to students with dyslexia?
I think it's absolutely critical because not everything can be done with technology. Sometimes you're given a test that you're not allowed to use assistive technology in certain situations. Sometimes they don't allow you to do it. It's not an approved accommodation in certain, SATs or things like that sometimes. And also in the real world, if you're going to be handed a menu with all these crazy fonts and stuff like that, it's one of those things where sometimes like you can't just, use an app to be able to read it to you all the time, because sometimes it's not perfect. Technology's come a long way, but it's still not perfect. And I think one of the biggest things that hit me one day was one of my students said, I just want to be able to read a menu. When I go out with my friends and we're picking something out for dinner, I just want to be able to read the menu. And so that is a huge thing that you don't even think about, is how much of our world is print. Driving on the street. If you have to drive somewhere and your maps tells you to go turn left on street blah blah blah, you have to be able to read street blah blah blah. And so you have to be able to recognize that that's what those letters on that sign say. And so it's really hard because people who, want to be able to do something need to be able to access reading. They may not be the best reader, but they need to know how to do it, because we can't always assume. Like, what if your cell phone dies? Then now what are you going to do the rest of the day? What if the battery died? What if you dropped your phone and it cracked? And so we need to make sure that people have all of the strategies that they need to be successful, even if, something happens to their device. It's their lifeline. We need to be able to make sure they have a backup plan.
And what about their ability to? We were talking before about their the ability to explain what words mean. So, is there a certain strategy for teaching kids about how to explain a concept? Like, if I ask a student, "What does this word mean?" Is there a certain way that they should explain it, or how would that work?
Sure. One of the things I really work on with the kids is about retell. So retelling a story is a great way to practice it. So if they're reading a story, it's not just about reading it, you have to understand it, right? And so one of the things I try to help them do is just take a moment and visualize, what does that look like? Think about it, then be able to tell it back to me. So I want them to be able to retell the story, giving me details and going in order, because that's a lot of times something people with dyslexia have trouble with, is sequence of events. And so they get the big idea, but they don't necessarily pay attention to what order everything happened. And so that's one of the big ways that you can practice, putting things into words, is just practice putting things into words, or practice retelling them out loud, practice reading out loud, and being able to do things more verbally and not always counting on, drawing it out. Because I have one student who would rather draw me a story of her weekend than actually talk to me about it. But I make her, after she draws out her idea, I make her actually tell me in words after, to try to build up those language skills.
Mm, very good. So, I'm sorry. So, the importance of verbalizing directions, verbalizing instructions. So it's important for
Yeah.
students with dyslexia because I know like they think in pictures, they prefer to draw things out, but we use words to communicate and there's words everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So,
And it is definitely a generalization. Like some kids with dyslexia are the opposite. They can talk and talk and talk and talk, but then the second you give them a book or make them write something, then it all falls apart. So each person is different. So some kids are extremely different in their verbal abilities compared to their written and reading abilities, and that's another way to identify dyslexia is if there's a mismatch between this kid who has this great vocabulary and talks and understands everything and then can't read. So that's another way to help identify dyslexia is that sometimes they're very highly verbal and understand everything verbally, but then once you put it on paper, that's where it falls apart. So dyslexia does look a little different in different kinds of people, but it's that disconnect and seeing that imbalance of this really smart kid somehow is having a hard time and not doing well in school.
mm, oh, fair point, fair point. All right, going back to the symptoms I'm looking at here. So, school age, okay, reading well below the expected level for
Mm-hmm.
age. I believe we talked about that. Is that a sign of
Absolutely.
dyslexia?
That's like the key sign that most people are recognize.
So, so what does that mean? So, reading well below your expected age, what does that mean? Because I've tutored students that, they might be in fifth grade and they're reading at a fourth grade level or third grade level. So, what exactly does that mean?
A lot of times that might be a fourth grader reading at like a first or second grade level. So they're still in those really basic patterns where they may have figured out how to read the really basic patterns like cat, bat, hat. But as soon as they got more complicated, like silent E's or a vowel team, like two letters like EA, that kind of thing, and then it fell apart. So a lot of times it means they understood the basic ones or the ones they could memorize. And then once they hit the point where they couldn't memorize it anymore and the spelling patterns got a lot more complicated, then it broke down.
Ah, okay, okay. So it's so they so as they got older, I guess I'm trying to process it myself.
Of course.
So it's so they're able to understand like smaller words, smaller sentences, but as you add more words, you add more sentences, it starts to get more difficult for them.
Yes, and as the words got longer and the patterns got more complicated, like think about the word light, for example. There's a G in there. And so if no one explicitly told you that IGH says I, then you would have no idea how to sound out the word light.
Mm, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So now let's see what else. Difficulty spelling, avoiding activities that involve reading. Okay, is that sounds like a
Oh,
big one.
that's like a whole big topic right there. So a lot of times kids actually get flagged for their behavior before they get flagged for their learning difference because kids who shut down are quiet in class, but kids who act out. So anytime you are in a terrible situation, you have like a fight, flight, or freeze kind of mentality. And a lot of times, especially boys, girls tend to freeze and not do anything and try to be quiet and hide in the back, whereas boys tend to act out and be the center of attention by either being the class clown or getting into trouble or breaking something. Not to say that girls can't too. Um, but that's often what we will flag first is the behavior or like, escape behaviors like, I'm going to go get a drink of water. Oh, I need to sharpen my pencil. And all of those things to avoid doing what is really hard for them because it's terrifying to try to do this thing that you know that you can't do. And so a lot of times people will get flagged for their behavior when it's actually an academic problem causing the behavior because it is so hard and so challenging for them. They will do anything to get out of it. And it's a lot better to be the class clown than the dumb kid in class who can't read. And so kids will get flagged for things that are disruptive when really it was an academic problem that caused them to disrupt the class because, they just were trying to get away from it.
Right, and then that's something, tutors and teachers should be aware of is those behavioral issues, right? So, we're quick to judge kids for being the behavior problem, right? But it might actually be a deeper cause,
Absolutely.
right? All right, let's see. Just throwing some stuff out there. So this one is for the older kids. Mispronouncing names or words or problems retrieving words. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So names follow the pattern of whatever language they originated. So, like my last name is Parnello, but where I am, we have a lot more people who speak Spanish. So, if I go somewhere, they say, "Is it Parnello or Parneo?" Because in Spanish, two L's makes more of a Y sound. And so, when people are trying to pronounce names, it's really challenging because if you don't know that name, have never seen it written on paper before, you may not know how to pronounce it because different languages have different patterns. For example, the OUX says more of an O sound in French. And so if you didn't know that that person's last name originated in French and that pattern makes that sound, then it makes it really hard to say it. And so people's names are often generated by whatever language their or culture their name came from. And so it makes it really challenging to try to read people's names because there could be different ways to pronounce it.
And what's the answer to that? What's the
Uh,
solution for that?
It's really just saying, "Hey, can you show me how to pronounce your name?" And it's really just asking because there's not really an easy way. It's not like you're going to learn every spelling pattern of every language in the entire universe. I've gotten very good at it over the years. But at the same time, sometimes the exact same pattern in one language versus another, like if you didn't know my name is Italian and not Spanish, you wouldn't know how to pronounce it. And so it's one of those things where you just have to, you learn this strategy of self advocacy of say, "Hey, I don't want to mispronounce your name. Can you let me know how you say your name?" Or if it's in a book, you might just ask the person next to you because that's one of the really big things I teach the students I work with is self advocacy. Is you got to be able to say, "Hey, dude, I've got dyslexia. This is really hard for me. Can you just tell me how to say your name?" And so, and just make it part of life. Just being able to know that, it's okay that it's different and it's okay to say, "Hey, I've got dyslexia. Like, how do you say your name?" Or like, "Your name is more letters than I know how to say." Or like, what is the deal?
Right, and even in that in that instance, they're engaging in conversation, right? Which is good practice for them. So being able to ask questions, being able to interpret a response. So any kind of social interaction is good for them.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm throwing something else. Difficulty doing, oh, this should be a big one. Difficulty doing math word problems.
Hmm. So when we think about, I was just replying to a comment in the chat. Um, uh, when we think about math, or when we think about dyslexia in general, we think it's a reading problem. But math has an awful lot of word problems. And so suddenly, sometimes kids with dyslexia can be really good at math. They have strengths and weaknesses and things like that. So different people have different strengths. And so when we have the different strengths, we also have to factor in how do the weaknesses affect those? Because if a student can't read the math problem, then they suddenly get a bad grade in math now too. And so sometimes they need different accommodations to be able to have somebody read the word problem aloud to them too. And then there's also the processing of the language as well. So, like I talked about before, it's all about processing language. And so, if you don't understand what the question's asking, you don't even know how to set up the problem to attempt to do it. And so, they need someone to explicitly show them, like, how do I find the important numbers? What are the key words in this problem that tell me what kind of math problem that I need to do? Is there something that tells me, oh, yeah, we're probably multiplying? Oh, this one's probably division. And so, teaching them how to process the words and what it's asking them to do.
Right. And especially with math, right? You have to know, when we teach you those special words like what did they how many did they have altogether? You may think I don't understand. Like something like the word altogether means to add, right?
Yeah.
So they would have to know what certain words mean and how it translates into math.
And they get tricky because the word more usually means to add or multiply. But if I say how many more, that now means subtract. And so there's those subtle differences of adding those two extra words to it instead of more and to how many more completely changes what kind of math you're supposed to do. And then kids with dyslexia also have trouble with rapid recall. And so being able to quickly pull out information from their brain takes a longer pathway to get it all out. And so sometimes they don't do well with math facts. They understand the basic understanding of like how the math works, but then they might get simple calculation errors because they don't quickly remember the multiplication facts or the addition facts and that kind of thing.
Mm, interesting, interesting. All right. And let's throw one more out there. Which we said this one. Spending an unusually long time completing tasks that involve reading or writing.
Yeah, that's where I was talking to you earlier about how using assistive technology, because even if they can do it, sometimes it just takes them longer. And so it's one of those things where if, you've got 3 tests tomorrow and each kid's usually supposed to study for an hour, that's 3 hours worth of homework. But if you have dyslexia and everything takes you twice as long, that's 6 hours worth of work. And so this is where sometimes we can teach kids to self-advocate about extensions and changing deadlines and saying, as part of my accommodations in my IEP, I'm allowed to have extended time. So can I please submit this on Tuesday instead of Wednesday because it's going to take me this many hours to do the other 2 classes assignments. Can I turn in yours the next day? Um, and being able to work on some more flexible deadlines, because even in the real world, like sometimes there are flexible deadlines. So, it's not everything always gets done on Friday. It's we have this big project to do. It takes as long as it takes. And so teaching kids to use those self-advocacy skills to work on getting some extensions if they need them.
And, that's also important for parents to advocate for. It's because I would imagine it's challenging when, you're supposed to take a test and knock it out or you have 2 hours for a test, right? But then you have the kid with dyslexia that needs longer time. Um, that's something that they would need to advocate for on an IEP.
Yes, absolutely. So often they can get extended time. Some tests only allow for like time and a half, but realistically, after you've gone more than an hour and a half, your brain's probably shut down anyway. Um, but it's definitely one of those things where sometimes a quieter testing space, because sometimes taking in extra auditory information if the class is loud. And so sometimes being able to do testing in a quieter setting and being able to take a longer amount of time, then that definitely makes a difference to be able to show what they really know. Because otherwise, if they only get to 3/4 of the questions on the test, then they automatically, that starts them off at a C before they've even been graded. And so if you have that extended time and it really allows you to get all the way to the end of the test and truly finish with thoughtful answers, that can show a really big difference in grading in terms of, showing what they really know.
Awesome, 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 awesome. All right. So are people are people with dyslexia, are they less intelligent than students that
Absolutely
don't
not.
have it?
In That's a great question because it's a misnomer. People think that it's because they're dumb, that's why they can't read. When really it's actually quite the opposite. A lot of times people with dyslexia have average to above average intelligence, actually. And so we've got, some of the major, tech company CEOs that are out here in the Bay Area where I'm located at. And it's not until, I've started working with a couple of their kids, they're like, oh, I think maybe I had dyslexia. And so they're really smart and their brain works in these great, amazing, out of the box ways that they can, create big companies and things like that. But it's one of those things where they just had to learn things in a different way, and they didn't make them any less successful, but it just means you have to just do things in a different way. And a lot of times kids are actually really smart, and adults with dyslexia are often very smart. It just has to be done in a slightly different way.
There you go. There you go. There you go. All right. So Lisa, thank you so much for joining me on Hot Topics. I like to ask my guests if they have any words of wisdom that they'd like to share. So, Lisa, what are your words of wisdom as we start to wind things down? What words of wisdom would you like to share with our audience?
I think the biggest thing is that it gets easier and school isn't everything. If you're struggling in the 4th grade, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to struggle in life. Sometimes it's one of those things where it's a moment of time that schools are set up a certain way, but you can actually pick jobs and careers that are totally within your niche, that are your cup of tea of the things that you are great at. So sometimes people with dyslexia are really good with their hands. And so they might do things like be able to become electricians or contractors or woodworkers and things like that, that are actually really great professions and things that they can go out and get their movement out, because a lot of times ADHD actually comes along with dyslexia. And so remembering that struggling in school does not necessarily mean you can struggle in life. You can pick the things that you're really great at and make a career out of them.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, well, Lisa, thank you again for joining me on Hot Topics. This was an amazing conversation and very enlightening. So, excuse me.
Thanks
Let's
for
go
having
ahead
me.
and yeah, let's go ahead and jump to your promo. All right, you guys. So Lisa Parnello, you can find her all over the place, you guys. So you can visit her online. She has her name and everything, you guys. So she has a website, www.parnelloeducation.com. She is also on Facebook and Instagram with the account name Parnello Education. I believe she has a Facebook page and a Facebook group. So I actually don't. I have the page, Parnella Education.
It's the Dyslexia Devoted Facebook group. So it goes with my podcast so that listeners, since I'm also talking to them in my podcast, that way they can kind of talk back to me. So there's a Dyslexia Devoted Facebook group.
Ah, okay. So is it like you have to
You just
listen
have
to the
to
pod?
go to the Dyslexia Devoted Facebook group and just ask to join, and then I can let people in.
Okay. So all right. So that's another Facebook group. Okay. All right. So we have the Facebook page, Parnella Education, as well as Instagram, Parnella Education. I don't have the information up here. So you also have a Facebook group called
Dyslexia Devoted.
Dyslexia Devoted.
I'll put it
Give
in the
me,
comments.
yeah, let's get that up here. Okay. So then you have a
Yes, that's
face.
Dyslexia Devoted is the name of my podcast. And so the group matches the name of the podcast. That way it's easy to find.
Okay, and the group Dyslexia Devoted. Give me a minute, guys. I'm gonna make sure we get all this. The the okay. All right, I'll check that. Dyslexia Devoted. Okay. And that is the name of the group. Okay. Get rid of that. Okay. Uh, Make one little change. Okay. There we go. There we go. All right. We made a correction, you guys. All right. So she has a Facebook page called Parnella Education. She also has a Facebook group called Dyslexia Devoted. And she has an Instagram page, Parnello Education. There we go. All right, and she also has two LinkedIn. So she has a personal LinkedIn. It's just her name, Lisa Parnello. She also has a business LinkedIn called Parnello Education Services. So I encourage you guys to follow her on all of these accounts, you guys. So go to her website to learn more about all that she has to offer, all of her services. The website again is www.parnelloeducation.com. You can check her out on Facebook and Instagram with the account name Parnello Education. She also has a Facebook group called Dyslexia Devoted. So I encourage you to join the Facebook group and to follow her on both of her LinkedIn accounts. The personal LinkedIn again is Lisa Parnello. It is just her name. And she has a business LinkedIn called Parnello Education Services. So I encourage you to follow her on all of those accounts, you guys, and reach out to her if you want more information about what she has to offer. And she also has a podcast, which we mentioned, called Dyslexia Devoted. So you could check it out wherever you get your podcasts, you guys. So you can listen to it on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, uh,
Yep. And it's
all.
even on my Facebook page. Like if you're like, I don't even know how to work a podcast, then which since some of you could be watching this live on our streaming right now and not actually on our little podcast. So I actually have it on my website too. So there's a little tab that you can go to for the podcast and you can actually listen right there online without downloading anything.
There you go. Beautiful, right? You can go straight to the website and listen to the podcast right there. So wherever you get your podcast, you guys, check it out. Dyslexia Devoted, that's the name of the podcast. So you can go to the website and listen to it, or you could go to any of your favorite stations to listen to it. And lastly, Lisa has a course for parents called Discovering Dyslexia. The link is on the bottom of the screen. It'll also be in the description. But Lisa, can you tell us more about the course?
Absolutely. So, a lot of the parents that I've come across when they first find me, when their child has just been diagnosed with dyslexia, say it's really overwhelming, that they don't even know where to begin. And even just reading the reports that are sometimes 30 pages long when you get those initial dyslexia diagnosis reports, and they're really hard to read and understand. So, I created a 6-week course that'll walk parents through that entire first year of dyslexia diagnosis of the IEP meetings, how to read the reports, how to use assistive technology, and all sorts of different things that will help make that first year a little easier because it is really overwhelming and you don't know where to begin. So I decided to create a little roadmap to help parents on their journey.
There you go. And where can they? Well, the link is there, but
And it's also on my website. It's really easy. Just go to parnelloeducation.com and click on the courses tab. And then that way you can see the different courses that I offer. And then that's the main one.
so tell us more about your business, your company, while we're
Yeah.
at it.
Of course. I work one on one with kids with dyslexia. And so I do one on one work with kids as young as kindergarten all the way up through high school as they're on their dyslexia journey of learning how to read, learning how to spell, and learning how to advocate for themselves and really understand their learning difference. And then I'm also a trainer. So I train teachers to work with kids with dyslexia. And through my courses now, I'm also trying to help parents. So my main goal is to really help people better understand dyslexia and how can we help the parents and families of kids with dyslexia because there's only so many hours in a day. I can only fit so many students in my caseload. So my courses and my podcast are really a way to help spread the word about dyslexia and help as many people as possible because dyslexia is so misunderstood and so many people just think it's seeing letters backwards, which it's absolutely not. And so I really want to be able to help as many families as possible through the podcasting courses so that I can reach as many people as we can so that kids can do better when adults know better. So that we can make people a lot more successful and feel like that they have a chance in life and that dyslexia is not a diagnosis of failure. It's how can we be successful with these amazing gifts that also come with dyslexia.
And what got you so interested in dyslexia? Why this one?
Well, I actually was working with kids with high functioning autism, and then I changed to a new school as an educator and was working with kids with dyslexia. And it was a really small, growing school that was helping kids in the world of dyslexia. And I found a kid I couldn't teach. I found a kid that I'd been a very successful teacher for many years. I taught all sorts of kids to read, and I couldn't teach this kid to read. I just couldn't. Nothing was working. And I got certified to teach her and other kids with dyslexia how to read. And then I got the second level of certification to teach the even more advanced strategies. And then we started hiring teachers that none of them were taught how to teach kids with dyslexia. So I became a trainer to help the teachers know how to teach the kids because that's really the big part of it is being able to help kids grow. If you're a teacher, you can only help your own little pocket of children. But if you can train parents and educators, then you can help thousands of kids through them by being able to teach other people how to help kids. Then you can make reach more lives and help more people be successful. And as I moved up the ranks, I became more of a manager of humans and not a teacher of kids. And so I actually left the school that I was at. I was at a director position, which just ended up dealing with lots of, people that are upset with things or making long-term goals, but not actually helping children. And so then that's where my private practice really grew from is as I moved up the ranks, I was working less and less with kids, and the kids are really what makes me happy. And so my business came from the parts of what I do that make me the happiest. So I work directly with kids and touch their lives every day. I work directly with families and help them learn and help them go through the process. And I still help educators as well. So I'm doing all the parts of what I've loved the most and not focusing so much on being a manager and more about helping reach more people and help people feel success because that really is what makes me feel joyful in life.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Love it, love it, love it. All right. Well, Lisa, thank you again for coming on the show and talking to us about dyslexia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. All right. I will put you backstage now. All right, you guys. And it is now you and me. So let me get my information up here. All right, you guys. So that's is the conclusion of yet another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. So, as a reminder, this podcast is a production of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So, what does that mean? Well, that means that if you or your child need any kind of academic assistance or one on one tutoring or college counseling or editing and proofreading, or you're interested in a variety of virtual workshops, reach out to us. Our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. You can also send us an email at success at a step ahead tutoringservices.com. You can also call or text us. Texting is preferred. The number is 347-762-2838. And you can also find us and follow us on our multiple social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Eventbrite, WhatsApp, and YouTube. So you can find us on all of those platforms and you can follow us as well. So, and as we were just talking about dyslexia, right? So if your child has any kind of special needs or kind of learning disabilities, our tutors work with, those types of students as well. So if you need that kind of help, reach out to us. Again, our website is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. So I encourage you to seek our tutoring services today. So if you are looking for a tutor, whether it's for your child or even for yourself, because we work with adults, reach out to us today. And I also want to encourage you, please let us know your feedback about this episode. So if you're watching this on video, drop a comment in the comment section or in the comment thread. If you are listening to this on a podcast, drop a rating somewhere. Let us know your thoughts about this episode for today. You may also be able to leave a comment depending on the platform. So if you're listening to this on Goodreads or Podchaser, drop a comment in the comment section there. Let us know your thoughts. So, however, you are taking in this episode, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, drop a comment in the comment section. Let us know your thoughts about this episode for today. Or if you're listening to this on a podcast, drop a rating, drop a star, drop something. But it helps us a lot. It helps our algorithm. So please let us know your thoughts about this episode for today. All right, you guys. And that is it. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to you joining me at the next episode. Thank you again, you guys. And now I am signing off. Bye, you guys.